My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 34 years old. And the morning I denied my brother's loan application, I was sitting 3 feet across from him at my own desk. His name was on the folder in front of me. Derek Collins. The application was for $280,000, a small business administration loan, the kind designed to help entrepreneurs expand a business with documented potential. Derek wanted to open a second location of his restaurant, the Golden Fork, and he had come to First Meridian Bank to make it happen. He came to me because I was his sister. He sat across from that desk the way he had always sat in every room since we were children. Relaxed, confident. One arm slung over the back of the chair, the other resting on my desk as though the desk already belonged to him by proximity. His collared shirt was clean and pressed, and he was wearing a smile that said this was a formality, that the decision had already been made, that family takes care of family. I had that 14-page underwriting report sitting under the denial letter. I had read every single line. I remember watching him adjust his cufflink while he waited for me to say something. The morning light was coming through the blinds at an angle, cutting narrow stripes across the carpet. The office smelled like coffee and printer paper, and the particular kind of quiet that exists in banks on Friday mornings before the lobby fills up. Derek said, "So, are we good?" I looked at him. I looked at the folder. I looked back at him. And then I slid the denial letter across the desk. What he didn't know was that I had read every single page of that application, and I remembered every dollar. Welcome to Betrayal House. I'm so glad you're here, because this story, this particular story, is one I've been carrying for a long time, and I think some of you are going to recognize pieces of it. If this is your first time here, this channel is a space for stories about the quiet kind of justice. Not screaming matches, not dramatic ultimatums. The kind of justice that happens when someone finally stops waiting to be seen and starts doing the work to make sure they can never be overlooked again. Before we go any further, if this story sounds like something that might matter to you, hit subscribe right now. We put out new stories every week, and every single one of them is about people who refuse to stay small. Give this video a like if you want the algorithm to keep putting this kind of content in front of people who need it. Now, to understand why that moment at my desk meant what it meant, to understand why I was completely calm while my brother's entire plan unraveled in front of me, I need to take you back, way back, to a house in Columbus, Ohio, in 1998, and a rule nobody ever said out loud, but everyone understood. Let me go back to the beginning, because nothing that happened at that bank makes sense without the house I grew up in. And nothing about the house makes sense without understanding who my brother was, who he had always been, and what that meant for everyone else who lived under the same roof. Our house on Meadowlark Drive was a 3-bedroom colonial, beige siding, 2-car garage, a yard with a maple tree that turned brilliant orange every October. My father, Richard Collins, was a regional sales manager for an industrial supply company. He left before 6 most mornings, drove a company car that always smelled faintly of air freshener and fast food, and came home tired, loosening his tie in the doorway before he'd even fully stepped inside. But tired was relative in our house. Tired faded when Derek was in the room. My mother, Patricia, was a stay-at-home mom who organized the church bulletin every Thursday and kept the house spotless and called my grandmother every Sunday at 3 o'clock without fail. She made dinner every night from scratch. I can still smell the garlic she'd start at 5:30, the onions softening in the pan, the sound of the exhaust fan over the stove. She was not a cold woman. She was warm in the specific way that made you feel, at certain moments, like you were just outside the edge of the warmth, like standing near a fire that someone else had built, and to which you had not been formally invited. Derek was 2 years older than me. He was big for his age from the time he was 8, athletic, loud in the way that gets called personality instead of disruptive, when you're also charming and you know how to make adults feel like you're performing specifically for them. He played baseball, third base, and my father drove 45 minutes each way to his away games, without ever once checking whether something else might be happening that day. I was the other one. Not the bad one. Not the difficult one. Just the other one. I was quiet. I liked books and puzzles, and I used to do the math problems in my head before the teacher finished writing them on the board. I used to watch the way numbers connected, the way a long, tangled equation would collapse into something clean and certain if you applied the right pressure in the right place. I found it beautiful in a way I couldn't explain to anyone who didn't already feel it, which was most people. My mother used to say I was serious for my age. In our house, that was a gentle way of saying, "You are not like your brother, and I'm not entirely sure what to do with that." The living room had a built-in shelf unit next to the fireplace. On Derek's side of the shelf, and I always thought of it that way, Derek's side, there were trophies. Baseball trophies from 3rd grade on up. A rotating cast of plaques and ribbons and team photos in frames, the photographs updated each season. Derek a little taller every year, the same grin. My father dusted those trophies himself. I saw him do it more than once on a Saturday morning, each one lifted carefully and replaced with a kind of deliberate attention that he gave to very few things in the house. My report cards were on the refrigerator, held up with magnets. They were good report cards. Straight A's, every semester from 4th grade forward. But I understood, without anyone explaining it, that a magnet on a refrigerator is not a shelf by the fireplace. That a nod at dinner is not a table that turns toward you. That serious and impressive are 2 different words with 2 different temperatures. There was a particular ritual I remember from dinner. When Derek had something to say, a story from practice, an opinion about a restaurant he'd seen on television, a plan he was developing, the whole table reorganized itself around him. My father would put his fork down. My mother would stop mid-motion. The conversation became Derek's. He had always had this quality, even as a child. He made people feel like they were being let in on something, like he was generous to share his world with you. When I had something to say, people listened politely and then returned to their plates. I noticed this from a young age. I did not mention it. I filed it in the same internal drawer where I was already beginning to keep things that seemed important to remember. When I was 8 years old, my parents sat us both down at the kitchen table one evening after dinner. The dishes were done, and the kitchen smelled like dish soap, and the overhead light was on, and my father had a folder in front of him. He cleared his throat the way he did when something was official. He explained that they were opening an education savings account for me. A 529 plan. That's a tax-advantage savings account the government created specifically for education expenses, meaning the money grows without being taxed as long as it's used for college or similar costs. They would put $400 a month into it. By the time I was 18, it should be enough to cover a significant portion of a 4-year university. "This money is for your future, Margaret," my father said. He used my full name. He was serious. I remember feeling something warm and certain in my chest. Not excitement, exactly. Something more solid than excitement. The feeling of being held in place by something reliable. I was 8 years old, and someone had just told me that my future had a plan, and the plan had a number, and the number was growing. "It's yours," my mother said. I nodded. I said thank you. I believed them completely. Derek across the table was picking at a loose thread on his sleeve and not paying attention. He was 10. He already had a college fund of his own, set up 2 years before. This wasn't news to him. The years went by the way years do, when you are not the center of them. Derek played baseball through middle school, then high school. Genuinely good. Not scholarship level, but the kind of good that fills bleachers and earns your father the right to refer to you, at dinner parties, as "my son, the athlete." He coasted through his classes without much effort and without much consequence, because the infrastructure of our household, who got helped with homework, who got reminded about deadlines, who got the car on weekends, was arranged around his schedule. But around the time Derek was 13, something else appeared alongside the baseball. He became obsessed with food, not eating it, though he liked that too. The making of it, the idea of it. He watched cooking shows obsessively, recorded them on VHS before we had DVR, rewound specific moments to study technique. He had opinions, real, informed opinions, about why a certain restaurant worked and why another didn't, what made a menu coherent, what a kitchen sounded like when it was well-run versus chaotic. He talked about opening his own place with the absolute certainty of someone who has never had to prove anything to anyone because the people around him have always done the proving for them. My parents found this charming. I found it interesting in a different way. Even then, at 14, watching my brother talk about his future with such complete confidence, while the financial architecture of his life was being built around him invisibly by other people, I found something worth paying attention to in the gap between confidence and preparation. I was building something quieter. I tutored other students in math starting in 9th grade, $4 an hour, cash transactions I tracked in a small notebook. I saved money without knowing exactly what I was saving it for. It felt important to have some. It felt important to know precisely how much. In the spring of my junior year of high school, I entered the Ohio State Academic Math Competition. It was held on a Saturday in April, on the Ohio State campus 40 minutes from our house. Participants competed in individual and team events across algebra, geometry, and statistics. I had been preparing for 6 weeks, working through practice problems at the kitchen table in the evenings, while the television played in the other room, and Derek talked on the phone in his room, and my parents moved through their routines. I won. First place, individual division. I found out the morning of the awards ceremony. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock. A small stage, folding chairs, parents with cameras filling the rows behind the competitors. My parents were not there. Derek had a soft opening that same day. Not a real restaurant. He was 17. He had convinced my parents to let him use the finished basement to host a dinner experience for a dozen of their friends. My mother had spent the morning at the grocery store, buying specific cuts of meat Derek had requested. My father had rented folding tables. The whole household apparatus had mobilized around Derek's afternoon project, and the math competition 40 minutes away had not made it onto anyone's radar. I drove myself to the ceremony in the car my parents let me use on weekends. I sat in the front row because I didn't need to save seats. They called my name, and I walked up, and the woman at the podium shook my hand and gave me the plaque, and I smiled for a photographer whose pictures I never saw. Then I drove home. The basement smelled like garlic and butter when I came in through the side door. Derek was describing a sauce to someone, gesturing with both hands. There was laughter. The sound of a kitchen performing for an audience. My mother looked up from the counter. "How did it go?" "I won," I said. "That's great, honey," she said, and handed me a dish to dry. I dried the dish. I set the plaque on the kitchen counter. Nobody picked it up that night. The next morning it had been moved to the corner near the toaster, displaced by the leftover appetizers Derek had brought up from the basement. I picked it up. I carried it to my room. I put it in my closet, on the top shelf, where I could see it from the doorway. And I didn't know then that the money they had told me was mine was already being spent. I got into Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship. The scholarship covered 60% of tuition. I did the math. The remaining 40%, plus room and board, came to roughly $68,000 over 4 years. The education savings account had been building for 10 years. At $400 a month, with average market returns, it should have been somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000. I wasn't worried. The summer before I left for college, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table again. Same overhead light, same folder in front of my father, same clearing of the throat. This time, the folder was empty. He explained carefully, in the measured tone of someone who has rehearsed the order of the sentences, that the education savings account had been liquidated the previous year. The money, $62,400, had been used as seed capital for Derek's restaurant venture. Derek was planning to open a small restaurant on the east side of Columbus. The family had decided to support him. The family had decided. Not your mother and I. The family. As if there had been a meeting I had attended and agreed to and then forgotten. As if my consent was implied in the fact that I shared their last name. I said, "That money was in my name." My father said, "You were a minor. We had signatory authority." He was right, technically. A 529 account opened for a minor has the parent listed as the account owner. The child is the beneficiary, but the parent controls the account. What he said was legally accurate. It was also the most precise description I had ever heard of the gap between what you are told is yours and what you can actually protect. I looked at the table for a long moment. I did not cry. I said, "Okay," and I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at the wall for probably 20 minutes. The evening was still light outside, June light, long and flat, coming through the gap in the curtains. Here is what I did not do. I did not yell. I did not slam anything. I did not call anyone. I am telling you this, not because I want you to admire the restraint, but because I want you to understand what it actually was. It was not restraint. It was something older than that. It was the particular stillness of someone who has already, on some level, been preparing for the possibility that the floor might not be where they thought it was. I picked up a notebook. I wrote down the gap. The total cost of 4 years at Ohio State minus the scholarship, minus what I had saved from tutoring, minus a realistic part-time income. I looked up federal student loan interest rates. I looked up average starting salaries for finance graduates, because that was already the direction I was leaning. I made a repayment projection at 3 different income scenarios. Then I made a plan. I got 2 jobs. The first was at a diner 3 blocks from campus, Tuesday through Saturday mornings, 6 to 11. The smell of that place is still in my memory. Burned coffee and maple syrup, and the specific industrial cleaner they used on the floors. A sharp synthetic scent that greeted you at the door before anything else did. I worked that shift for 2 years, and I knew every regular by name and order by the end of the first month. There was a retired teacher named Harold, who came every Wednesday for the same eggs and read a physical newspaper, and he always left the crossword unfinished on the table. I used to finish it on my break, just for something to do with my hands. He never knew. There was a young mother who came in on Saturday mornings with a toddler and always looked exhausted and always tipped generously, and I used to make sure her coffee was refilled before she had to ask. These small consistencies mattered to me. They still do. The second job was at the university library, 2 evenings a week. Quieter work, reshelving, check-ins, occasionally helping students track down sources for research papers. I liked that job in a way that was harder to explain than the diner. There was something about the system of it, the way everything had a place, and the place was specific and knowable, and if you understood the system, you could find anything. There was no version of the library where a book just disappeared because someone decided to use it for something else. I took out a federal subsidized student loan for the remaining gap, roughly $18,000 over 4 years. I read the promissory note in its entirety before I signed it. I understood the interest rate, the grace period, every repayment option available to me. I filed the signed copy in a blue accordion folder I started keeping in my desk drawer. The blue accordion folder. That is where everything went from that point forward. Every pay stub, every bank statement, every loan document, every lease and every receipt for anything that mattered. I did not start this habit because anyone advised me to. I started it because I had learned, at a kitchen table on a summer evening, that the only money you can really count on is money you can account for yourself. That documentation is not paperwork. It is proof of reality. I switched my major to finance the second semester of sophomore year, after I realized I had been reading the economics textbooks purely for pleasure before they were assigned. Something about financial systems, the architecture of how money moves, how risk gets priced, how a market reaches equilibrium and what happens when it doesn't, felt like the same thing I had always loved about math, but with consequence, with stakes that were concrete and human. I graduated with a 3.9 GPA and $15,000 of my loan already paid down. Junior year, I interned at a regional bank. My supervisor was a woman named Donna, 42, gray-streaked hair, wore 3 blazers in a weekly rotation, could read a balance sheet faster than most people read a headline. On my last day, she pulled me into her office and said, "You're the most methodical analyst I've trained in 15 years. Come back when you graduate." I came back. I graduated on a Thursday in May. I did not tell my family the date. I walked across the stage in the morning and started my new job the following Monday. By the time I walked out of that ceremony with my finance degree in my hand, I had something Derek, for all his charm and family backing and $62,000 of seed capital, would never have. A paper trail of everything I had ever earned, and everything that had been taken from me. I was 29 when I became a loan officer at First Meridian Bank in Columbus. The job suited me the way certain jobs suit certain people. Not because it was easy, but because the skills it required were ones I had been building my entire adult life without knowing that's what I was doing. Reading applications, verifying income and assets, assessing risk, identifying the gap between what someone claimed their situation was and what the numbers actually demonstrated. I was very good at it. I had my own office on the second floor. Small, a single window looking out at the parking structure across the street. The view was not scenic. I found it useful anyway. I am someone who notices patterns. And parking structures have patterns worth noticing. What times people arrive, how long they stay, what that tells you about the businesses nearby. My colleagues thought I was being modest when I said I liked my office. I was being honest. The blue accordion folder, the third one, the first two had filled up completely, lived in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. Tax season, lease renewals, any financial decision of consequence. I brought it out and I worked from it. Everything dated, everything filed. Derek's restaurant, the Golden Fork, had opened 4 years prior in a strip mall on the east side of Columbus. I had driven past it once, the year it opened. The sign was professional. Warm lettering on a dark background. The kind of sign a graphic designer had made rather than a sign shop. The parking lot had 6 cars in it on a Saturday at noon. I noted this without noting that I was noting it. My mother mentioned Derek whenever she called, which was every 2 weeks on Sunday afternoons. The calls had a reliable structure. Her health, the weather, someone from church, and then Derek. How the restaurant was doing, who had been in, what new thing he was trying, a seasonal menu he was testing, a local food blogger who had written something positive, a catering arrangement that had gone well. I listened. I said, at appropriate intervals. I asked what she'd been reading. One Sunday in March, when I was 33, she mentioned that Derek was thinking about expanding. He says the East Side location is ready for a second one, she said. He's got a vision. That's great, I said. He's looking at financing options, she said. I said. And I filed that information the way I filed everything, carefully, in a place where I would find it again when it became relevant. 3 months later, it became relevant. He called me on a Tuesday evening in May. I was at my kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of pasta going cold in front of me and a commercial loan file open to my right, making notes in the margin, and when Derek's name appeared on my phone screen, I felt a specific quality of attention move through me. Not alarm, not anticipation, just the feeling of a pattern clicking into focus. We talked occasionally, holidays sometimes, a birthday acknowledgement. We were not close. We had never had the kind of closeness that comes from choosing each other, from seeking each other out, from building something between two people, rather than simply occupying the same house for 18 years. I answered. He said hi, said hope things were going well, asked about work with the brief warmth of someone who is about to reach the actual subject. He had always been good at the approach. The small talk was real enough that you couldn't call it fake, but it was never the destination. Derek moved toward things. He needed a business expansion loan. $280,000, SBA-backed. The Small Business Administration, for those who don't know, is a federal agency that guarantees a portion of certain business loans, which reduces the risk for the lender and makes financing available to businesses that might otherwise have trouble qualifying. He had identified a second location on the north side of Columbus. He had investors who were interested but needed to see a bank commitment in place before finalizing their participation. He wanted me to help it go smoothly. From the inside. You know how these things work, he said. If it's your sister handling the application. I'm a loan officer, I said. Not the approval committee. Still, he said, family helps family. He let that sit. And then he said the thing. "Come on, Mags. It's not like you ever needed that money anyway. You did fine without it." The pasta was cold. I was looking at the wall above the counter, at the clean line where the paint met the cabinet frame. "I'll look into it," I said. "Great," he said, already moving forward into the details of the north side location, the expected foot traffic in that neighborhood, whether an open kitchen concept would translate to a space that size. I let him talk for 90 seconds, and then said I had to go. I told him to submit the formal application through the bank's commercial lending portal. He said he would. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet. He thought he was calling in a favor. He had no idea what he was actually beginning. The next morning, before I touched Derek's application, I made 2 appointments. The first was with the bank's compliance officer, a careful man named Arthur, who wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck and spoke with the careful specificity of someone who has spent decades watching people make mistakes that could have been avoided by asking the right question first. I spent 30 minutes with him going through the relevant guidelines. The question was simple. Could I process my brother's application through standard channels, transparently, without being accused of bias or conflict of interest, as long as I followed normal underwriting procedure? Arthur confirmed. Yes, provided I documented my process thoroughly, disclosed the family relationship to my manager in writing, and made no deviation from standard evaluation criteria. If I felt the relationship compromised my objectivity, I could request a reassignment. I did not request a reassignment. I disclosed the relationship to my manager in writing that afternoon. She reviewed the protocol, asked me 2 questions about the nature of our relationship, noted the disclosure in the file, and cleared me to proceed. The second appointment was lunch with my friend Elena Marsh. Elena had been a year ahead of me in pre-law when we met, and she was now a business attorney at a firm downtown. I explained the situation in factual terms, the relationship, the application, what I needed to understand, and asked her to walk me through what the SBA evaluation process actually required. Elena put her fork down and looked at me. "If the numbers say no," she said, "the numbers say no. You'd be doing something wrong if you bent them, not the other way around." She walked me through the key thresholds in plain language. An SBA 7A loan, the most common type, which is what Derek was applying for, requires a minimum credit score of 650, positive cash flow sufficient to service the debt, a debt service coverage ratio of at least 1.25, meaning for every $1 of required loan payment, the business needs to generate at least $1.25 in net operating income, and available collateral to secure the loan where possible. "If he doesn't clear those marks," Elena said, "a denial isn't personal. It's the function of the system." I said, "I know." She looked at me. "But you needed to hear it out loud." "Yes," I said. That evening, I opened Derek's application in the commercial lending system, and I began to read. His credit score came back first, 591. The SBA minimum was 650. He was 59 points below threshold before I had looked at a single other document in the file. I noted it. I moved on. The Golden Forks financial statements covered 24 months, the standard review window, profit and loss reports, bank statements, and the past 2 years of tax returns. The restaurant had been operating for 4 years. I had access to the most recent 2. In those 24 months, the restaurant had generated negative cash flow in 11 of them. Not barely negative. The worst month showed operating expenses exceeding revenue by 30 to 40%. The summer showed improvement. A lunch pattern emerged June through August that kept things above water. But the fall and winter quarters showed the same story every time. More going out than coming in. Consistently, predictably. The tax returns added something I had not expected. Derek had paid himself a salary of $85,000 per year, from a restaurant posting an annual loss. I looked at those numbers for a long moment, because what they described was a specific pattern of decision-making. Derek had treated the business's bank account as a personal income source, regardless of whether the business was generating enough to support that income, which meant the losses were not entirely operational. They were, in part, a choice. He had chosen his own comfort over the business's solvency. I noted it. I moved on. His personal financial statement revealed $47,000 in credit card debt spread across 4 accounts. 2 outstanding vendor judgments. One from a produce supplier, $4,300, and one from a commercial linen service, just under $2,000. Both unpaid. Both old enough to have moved through collections and onto his permanent record. I ran the debt service coverage ratio with the proposed loan payment factored in. 0.78. The minimum was 1.25. For the loan to be viable, the business needed to generate $1.25 for every dollar it owed. Derek's business was generating 78 cents. The second location was not a growth strategy. It was a weight being added to a structure that was already listing. I was almost finished with the review when I reached the personal financial statement's final section. Business history and initial capitalization. A standard narrative field. Applicants describe how they initially funded their business. Most people write 2 or 3 sentences. Derek had written, seed capital of $62,000 contributed by family in 2008, used to secure lease and initial build-out of the Golden Fork. Standard language. But attached to the statement, flagged as a supporting document, was a copy of the original certificate of deposit. I looked at it for a long time before I moved. I recognized it, not because I had seen it recently, because I had seen it once when I was 8 years old, at a kitchen table where my father had a folder in front of him, and my mother said the words, "It's yours." My name was on it. Margaret A. Collins, beneficiary. It was a 10-year CD, a certificate of deposit, which is a savings account that locks funds in for a fixed term and earns a guaranteed interest rate, federally insured. Opened in 1998 and designated as an education savings vehicle. It had matured in 2008 and been liquidated for the full $62,400. Derek had included this document in his SBA application, as proof of the financial foundation on which he had built his business, as evidence of capitalization history, as part of his story about who he was and what he had worked with. My name had been on that account for the first 8 years it existed. He had included it without mentioning that. I photographed the document. Then I requested the underlying bank records through our records access system. The CD had been opened at what was then Ohio Savings Bank in 1998. The account had listed my name as beneficiary from the date of opening until 2006, when my name was quietly removed and replaced with my father's as sole account holder. 2 years later, the account was liquidated. The funds were transferred. I sat with those records for 3 days. I did not tell anyone what I had found. I went home each evening and cooked and slept, and came back in the morning. On the second evening, I took a long walk around my neighborhood, a route I sometimes used when I needed my body moving so my mind could work. I walked past a park, past a school, past the grocery store where I stopped to buy milk I didn't need just to have a reason to go in. On the third day, I understood what I was actually sitting with. Derek had not only spent the money, he had incorporated it into his professional identity. He had submitted it to a federal program, a program backed by public funds, as evidence of his own financial story, as part of the documented case for why he deserved $280,000 more. He hadn't just taken from me. He had built his application on top of what he took. He had put it on his resume. I want to stop here for just 1 second, because I know some of you are recognizing something right now. That specific, particular feeling, when you realize that the person who took from you didn't just spend what was yours. They used it. They referenced it. They made it part of their story of success, without once acknowledging that it belonged to someone else first. If that has ever happened to you, drop 1 word in the comments. Just 1 word. The word for what that discovery felt like. I'll be back in a moment to tell you what happened on Friday. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. This community shows up for these stories in a way that matters, and I don't want you to miss what comes next. Derek called the following Monday. "Maggie, come on. I have investors timing out. How much longer does it take to push through a basic application?" I said. "I'm completing the standard review. I'll have a decision by end of week." He called again Wednesday. "Can you at least tell me which direction it's going?" I need to give people something, I said. I'll have a decision by Friday. That evening, my mother called. Patricia Collins had a specific tone when she had been briefed by Derek and was calling on his behalf while framing it as her own concern. I had been reading that tone for 20 years. It had a quality of deliberate casualness, like someone trying to hold their voice very still. Your brother says the loan process is dragging, she said. It's on schedule, I said. He needs this, Margaret. A pause waited with preparation. After everything we've done for you. I was in my kitchen. The window over the sink showed the neighbor's backyard, the oak tree, still green, the last of the evening light going flat and gray behind it. I said, What exactly did you do for me, Mom? Silence. Not a short silence. A long one. The kind that fills with the shape of everything that has never been said in a relationship. All the things that accumulate in the space between what is real and what people have agreed to pretend is real. She said, Don't be dramatic. I said, I'll have a decision by Friday. I hung up, and I went to my desk. I prepared the underwriting report Thursday evening, after the building had emptied. 14 pages, every item documented, every figure sourced and cited. Credit score, 591, 59 points below the SBA minimum of 650. Cash flow, negative in 11 of the past 24 months, with a summary table showing the pattern month by month. Debt service coverage ratio, 0.78, calculated at 3 different scenarios, none of which reached the threshold of 1.25. Personal credit card debt, $47,000. Itemized. Vendor judgments, 2, with case numbers and outstanding amounts. Owner salary drawn during periods of operating loss, $85,000 annually, documented across both tax return years. The denial was not a close call. The denial was clear. I formatted the denial letter on bank letterhead, signed it, placed it on top of the report. Then I opened a blank document and wrote something that had no case number, no bank letterhead, no official standing of any kind. A letter. Private. From me to my brother. I wrote it the way I write everything. Precisely, with dates and figures and verifiable facts, and no language I would be unwilling to read back to myself later. It began, This letter is not part of your application file and carries no bearing on the bank's decision. It is a private communication from me to you. Then I listed, in chronological order, without commentary, the date the education savings account was opened, the account number, the original monthly contribution of $400, the projected total at maturity, the date my name was removed as beneficiary, the date the account was liquidated, the total amount, $62,400. Then, the 2 jobs I worked to pay for college, with years. The federal student loan I took out, its original amount, the interest rate I locked in, and the date I paid it off, ahead of schedule, 4 years early. The date I received my finance degree, the date I was hired at First Meridian Bank. At the bottom, 1 final paragraph. The document you included on page 9 of your application's supporting materials lists the amount above as seed capital contributed by family. I want you to know that I recognize that document. My name was the beneficiary on that account for the first 8 years of its existence. Presenting it in a federal loan application as evidence of your capitalization history, without disclosing that the named beneficiary was someone other than yourself, may constitute misrepresentation of fund sources under SBA lending guidelines. I am not filing a complaint at this time. That decision remains open. I hope the restaurant does well. I genuinely do. Maggie, 2 copies printed. 1 for Derek. 1 for my accordion folder. I sent Derek a meeting confirmation through the portal. Commercial loan decisions above $150,000 at First Meridian were delivered in person. That was a real policy, not something I invented. He confirmed for Friday at 10 o'clock. He walked into my office right on time. He was in a dark gray collared shirt, pressed and clean. He had a notepad tucked under his arm. The notepad told me everything I needed to know about his expectations. He had come to take notes on approval conditions and timelines and next steps. He had come to begin. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat in it the way he had always sat in every chair in every room, like he was doing the chair a favor by choosing it. One arm rested on my desk. He was comfortable. He was certain. "So," he said, "are we good?" I slid the denial letter across the desk. The 14-page report was underneath it. He looked at it. His eyes tracked the first paragraph. "Your application for a Small Business Administration 7A loan in the amount of $280,000 has been denied." And the smile held for 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then it didn't. He flipped to the next page. His jaw shifted. That specific, small shift of someone processing information they were completely certain they would not receive. He went through the report carefully, more carefully than I had expected, page by page. I watched his neck go red above his collar, that particular red that starts low and moves upward slowly, the kind that tells you the body is registering something before the face has decided what expression to wear. He closed the report. He looked at me. "You did this on purpose." "I followed standard underwriting procedure," I said. "Every item in that report is sourced. The credit score threshold is an SBA requirement, not a decision I made personally. The cash flow figures come directly from your own financial statements. The debt service coverage ratio is a mathematical calculation that produces the same result regardless of who runs it. You could have told me beforehand. You could have flagged the problems before I even submitted, given me a chance to—" "That's not how underwriting works," I said. "The application process exists specifically because evaluations need to be made on documented reality, not on advanced coaching about what to present and what to address before anyone looks." He pushed the report back across the desk. Controlled. He was making an effort to stay controlled, and I could see the effort. "This is personal. It's procedural," I said. I reached to the right side of my desk and picked up the second document, the personal letter. I set it in front of him without any explanation. He picked it up. I watched him read. The office was very quiet. Somewhere in the building, a printer started and stopped. The air conditioning cycled. Derek's face, as he read, moved through several things. The flush deepened, then receded, then settled into something I had not seen on him before. A particular quality of stillness. The stillness of someone encountering for the first time a version of a story they believed they owned entirely. He set the letter down. He said, "That money was a family decision. You weren't even using it yet." I looked at him for a moment. "I was 16, I said. "My name was on that account. And you listed it on a federal loan application as your own seed capital, without noting that the named beneficiary on the account was a different person. That's misrepresentation of fund sources, Derek. It's a specific compliance concern in SBA lending because these loans are backed by public funds, taxpayer money. I am not filing a complaint at this time. That decision remains open to me." His face did several things, very quickly. The color receded. What settled in its place was the specific, unfamiliar pallor of someone who has just discovered that a document they treated as part of their own private history is, in fact, shared, and that the other person sharing it has been keeping records for a very long time. I had not raised my voice once, not because I was containing something, because there was nothing to contain. I was not operating from anger. I was operating from documentation. I closed the folder. "I hope the restaurant does well," I said. "I mean that. The Golden Fork has been standing for 4 years, and that represents real work, real decisions, real effort. But I cannot approve a loan the numbers don't support. Approving it wouldn't be helping you. It would be setting you up for a default you can't absorb." Derek stood up. He said nothing. He picked up his copy of the denial letter. He left the personal letter on my desk. He walked out of my office and across the lobby and through the front door, and I heard it close behind him. I sat in the quiet. The morning light was coming through the blinds at an angle, cutting narrow stripes across the carpet. The office smelled like coffee and printer paper. I had read every single page of that application, and I had remembered every dollar. Derek did not find another lender. The same financials that had appeared in my office appeared at every commercial bank and credit union he approached over the following months. Numbers do not change their conclusions based on who is reading them or how much the subject of the evaluation would prefer a different outcome. The credit score was the credit score. The cash flow was the cash flow. The debt service coverage ratio came out the same at every institution. The second location never opened. The investors he had mentioned on our phone call, the ones whose timeline had been so urgent, so pressing, the ones who needed a bank commitment by a certain date, went quiet when the commitment failed to materialize. That is how that works. The bank's evaluation functions as a signal. When the signal says no, the downstream conversations stop. I received a voicemail from my father 6 days after the meeting. He spoke for 4 minutes in a tone of controlled fury that I recognized from 2 or 3 occasions in my childhood. It was the voice he used when he had already decided what he was going to say before he picked up the phone. He used the phrase, "You could have handled this differently," 3 times. I listened to it twice. I did not call back. Instead, I wrote an email to both my parents. 3 paragraphs. The first explained the denial in neutral, factual terms. The application had been reviewed under standard criteria. The criteria were industry standard and federally mandated. The outcome reflected the documented financial picture of the business. The second paragraph attached 3 documents. A scan of the original CD certificate with my name listed as beneficiary. The bank record showing the date and nature of the change to the account in 2006. And the specific page from Derek's application where the fund appeared as his personal capitalization history without attribution. The third paragraph was 1 sentence. I am not asking for an apology or an explanation. I am sending these so that the record, at least between us, is accurate. I sent it. 4 days later, my mother called. Not with the prepared tone. A different one. Quieter. The voice of someone who has spent 4 days alone with a set of documents they had not expected to exist. She said, "I didn't know your name was still on that account." I said, "It was. For 8 years." A pause. "I'm sorry, Margaret." "I know," I said. We talked for a few minutes about things that did not have much weight. Then we said goodbye. My father did not call. Derek, to his credit, and I want to be precise about that phrase, because credit given where it's genuinely due is part of the point, went back to the golden fork and made changes I had not predicted. He cut his own salary by 40%. He renegotiated payment terms with his remaining suppliers and settled the outstanding vendor judgments. He reduced the menu from 38 items to 22, building the shortened version around the dishes with the best margins and the most consistent kitchen execution. He restructured his staff's hours. Within a year, the restaurant's cash flow had stabilized. By the year after that, it was posting consistent, modest positive numbers for the first time. He did not call me. I did not call him. A colleague told me some months later that a man matching Derek's description had come into the bank and asked to speak with the branch manager about my handling of the application. The manager had reviewed the underwriting file in full. He had told Derek the decision was sound. That October, I drove to Hocking Hills State Park on a Saturday morning and hiked alone for 4 hours. The leaves were at peak color that week, orange and yellow, and the specific deep red that only holds for about a week before the wind takes it. The air smelled like cold stream water and leaf decay, and something clean and mineral underneath both of those things. The kind of smell that doesn't exist indoors, and that I find I need sometimes to think clearly. My boots got wet crossing a shallow stream on the way in, and I stayed wet-footed for the rest of the hike without minding. There is a waterfall at Old Man's Cave that I have visited twice in my life. Both times I sat on the same flat rock beside it. Both times I did the same thing. I stopped moving and let the sound of the water fill up whatever had been loud inside me. I sat there for a long time. I thought about a Saturday in April, 20 years earlier. A folding chair in the front row of an awards auditorium. A plaque held out by someone whose name I never learned. A parking lot where nobody had come. I thought about a dish my mother handed me to dry. I thought about a notebook, and a blue accordion folder, and a diner that smelled like burned coffee and maple syrup at 6 in the morning, and a woman named Donna who wore 3 blazers in rotation and read balance sheets faster than most people read menus. I still have the plaque from the math competition. It's on a shelf in my home office, the left side of the shelf. On the right side, in a simple black frame, no mat, no engraving, just the document behind glass, is the certificate of deposit. The certified copy I requested through the bank record system earlier that year. My name on it, in the original font. Margaret A. Collins, beneficiary, 1998. I had it framed without explaining it to anyone who visited my office. No one has asked. It is not there as a wound. I am not looking at it when I have bad days and reminding myself to stay angry. I don't need to stay angry. Anger is a fuel that burns fast and leaves residue. It is there as a proof that something was mine, that it was always mine, even when someone else's name was substituted on the paperwork, that the removal of a name from a legal document does not retroactively transfer ownership of what the document represented, and that being made to build, without what was yours, does not make the building less real or less solid or less entirely your own. Here is what I have come to understand, sitting on that rock with wet boots and the sound of water falling. The people who take from you are making a specific bet. They are betting that what they took is what you needed, that without it, you will be smaller, less capable, less able to compete, that the advantage they gave themselves will compound over time in their favor, and the disadvantage they gave you will compound in yours. What they do not account for is compound interest on people. Not just on money, though there was a specific, quiet satisfaction in paying off my student loan 4 years ahead of schedule, alone, on a Thursday afternoon in November, with nobody watching. But compound interest on judgment, on the precision that develops when you have had to read every document you sign because you cannot afford not to, on the attention to financial detail that becomes automatic when you have learned, early and without cushion, that numbers tell the truth even when the people presenting them don't, on the professional authority that accumulates over years in a field you chose not because someone handed you a path, but because you built one yourself in the hours between diner shifts and library closings. Derek borrowed my start. What he built with it is his. What I built without it is mine. And on a Friday morning in October, when he sat across my desk with a notepad he would not need, and a smile that assumed the room would bend toward him the way rooms always had, the two things met in the same space for the first time. I closed the folder. The numbers had said exactly what they needed to say. If this story landed somewhere in you, if you recognize the quiet kind of taking, the kind that happens in paperwork and account changes and family decisions made in rooms where your name was not spoken, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you were when you finally saw it clearly. Tell me what the account was in your version, even if it was never a literal certificate of deposit. Tell me the word that describes what it felt like to understand. This channel exists for exactly these stories, for the ones where justice doesn't arrive with an apology or a ceremony, where the win is procedural and quiet and nobody sends flowers, where the most powerful thing you can do is become so rigorously prepared, so carefully documented, so completely steady, that when the moment comes, and it will come, you don't need to raise your voice. You just slide the paper across the desk. Like this video if Maggie's story is one you needed to hear today. Subscribe if you want to stay in this room. We put out a new story every week, and every one of them is about someone who built something the people who underestimated them never fully accounted for. And if you know someone who has been underestimated for long enough, share this with them. I'll see you next week.